Meister Eckhart, the medieval Christian mystic, wrote about spirituality in a way that goes beyond any particular faith tradition or religion. He wrote about a single component in all people, which he called the soul or the intellect, and he thought of it as the foundation for our potential to do noble things in the world, make good choices and good actions. He said that there is a light in the soul, and it is a light that is uncreated and cannot be created. And I call that light ordinary goodness. And I believe that the ultimate goal of all life, if there is such a thing, is to express that goodness by allowing it to come alive in us. Now, Meister Eckhart, he urged us not to flee from the world to discover our spiritual potential, but to find it and embrace it in whatever we are doing, in the ordinary things of our lives. He thought of our spirituality as not something that we add on, not as something that we achieve and discover, but as something that is permanently and always present in us, waiting for us to turn to it so that it can express through us. Whenever we turn to the light within us, he wrote, it will guide us to love goodness in ourselves and in others, and to have confidence that no matter how turbulent our times are, no matter how disorienting the changes in life may be, that there remains consistently something in us, all the while something that we can trust, our ordinary goodness. And so today we are asking ourselves the question, what would goodness have me do? But first, what is goodness? Goodness is everything from love, gentle kindness, compassion and generosity, to moral distinction or virtue. It is strength and excellence, and sometimes, as we will see, a synonym for the divine. Most importantly, I believe goodness is already present in us like a dormant seed, waiting for the right circumstances to germinate and then take root. Moreover, when it does, it has immense power to inspire and instill hope, to help and nurture. When we do not allow it to spring forth, the consequences are worrisome. For a life not fueled by ordinary goodness must draw its strength from somewhere else, and the options are grim. I use the word ordinary to describe goodness in the sense of something so normal that it's easily unnoticed. And the idea of my book is that to bring our ordinary goodness out into the open, we must notice it. Pay attention to it. Don't get distracted. Share it. That's how we multiply it in our lives and in other people's lives, so that we can get to a place where we can trust it. Let's begin with the practice of noticing ordinary goodness. Well, perhaps you've noticed, as I have, that mainstream news services focus on life's spectacular and alarming events. Well, it's true that horrific and shocking events are a reality of our life. And it is also true that at the same time, regular people like you and me everywhere continue to do amazingly good things. For example, when we awkwardly love our children, and it's very difficult to do so. When we quietly recover from setbacks that shatter our sense of well-being. When we take the trash out for a neighbor when we're pressed for time ourselves. When we show up uncomfortably at an acquaintance's mother's funeral to show support. Or when we donate to a cause, even when our own personal resources are very low, and we do it all with no fuss. That is practicing ordinary goodness. And I propose that this goodness is so ordinary that it's not newsworthy. There is a story about an online newspaper service that tried an experiment. For a whole week, they focused only on the positive elements in every news story. The editor reports that subscriptions plummeted. Literally, nobody wanted it. Oh, there's a secret to learn right there, that during tumultuous times, there is still goodness going on, but my practice must be to notice it. Not to deny what's happening in the world, but to bring some balance, to notice what is also simultaneously true. There's a great exercise for noticing goodness by Donald Altman in the Mindfulness Code. He's a mindfulness coach. And he suggests that redirecting our attention to what is good that we have in our life, it won't cause us to ignore the more urgent difficulties that we have and that other people have around us, but rather, in practicing this mindful attention to goodness, it will help us to notice and appreciate the ordinary things that make life extraordinary. And here's his guide. He says, first, turn your attention to what you have in your life from the very moment you wake up in the morning. Appreciate the breath, the blankets that warm you, the shower that refreshes you and cleans you, and even the alarm clock that wakes you up. Next, find a reminder of ordinary goodness that you can carry with you throughout the day, such as a picture of a loved one, a stone or other object from a memorable trip, or an inspirational quote. Finally, share your appreciation of ordinary goodness with others. And we're going to talk about that sharing in just a moment. When I read this exercise, it makes me think of the teaching at the center that says something like this: we are immersed in and surrounded by a law of cause and effect that takes our deeply held beliefs and what is in our attention and then transforms that into our reality. Noticing goodness, I believe, works in the same way. Noticing it helps bring it forward into our experience and multiplies it. But now the second point. To notice goodness is one thing. Now, will I pay attention to it? That's another thing altogether. To pay attention to me means asking the question, what would goodness have me do? And then to follow through with it. I think that takes courage to follow through, because I may have to have more confidence in goodness than I have confidence in society's trends and urgency. But I confess, I'm like everyone else. Often I know very well what goodness would have me do. But I get distracted. Do you? Nobody. I get distracted by things, urgent things, shiny things, scary things, self-serving interests, beautiful things, personal gain, comfort, fear, self-preservation. They distract me. In my book, I tell a story about an incident on a train that really changed my life forever. I was a young man, 19 or 20, and I was serving in the South African Air Force. I was catching the train to Air Force headquarters where I was working at the time. And in those days in South Africa, travel was segregated. And so white South Africans stood on one side of the platform and black South Africans stood on the other side of the platform. And white South Africans traveled in one carriage and black South Africans traveled in another. And it was illegal for a person of one color to travel in the carriage of another person. As we pulled out of the station and the doors of the train slowly closed, a man put his hand in to stop the closing of the doors so he could open them to get on the train in a last effort to make it, obviously in a hurry to get to work. But unfortunately, his hand was the wrong color for the carriage. What happened next was bizarre, because out of nowhere, police officers arrived and they beat him brutally. And every white person on the train, including me, just watched. Now, I tell myself that I didn't know what to do, that there were serious consequences. I was in uniform, and speaking up against a police officer would have resulted in something, and so goes the story. The truth is, and it took me a while to admit it, is that I knew what to do. I always knew what to do. I had the example of my grandmother who always taught me to do the right thing. I had my conscience. I had my ordinary goodness. It's just that doing the right thing would have exposed me to the risk of danger. It threatened my self-preservation sense, and so I placed my well-being ahead of someone else. Oh, but what a price to pay for such a choice. I have never forgotten that incident. Now I know the price I pay every time I pretend to not know what goodness would have me do. It's a loss of self-respect, but it's so much more than that. Slowly, since then, I started to make different decisions in my life. Not to avoid the risk of unfavorable outcomes, but because my integrity depended on it, the integrity of my soul, my identity. When I notice goodness and I pay attention to what it urges me to do, it allows me to multiply it in the world by sharing it. Oh, and there is nothing more sweetly restorative than connecting to other people through the generosity of our spirit. And it doesn't have to be a grand gesture. I mean, in truth, sometimes when we're suffering, even a smile may seem difficult to share. And yet, even that small act of generosity has the power to bring people together, to change emotions, and to reunite us with our innate healing and beautiful goodness. A very, very strong and powerful way to share ordinary goodness is to reflect it back to others. I try to ask myself now and then, when last did you pick up the phone and call someone, a friend, and ask them how they're doing and appreciate them? I try to ask myself from time to time, when last did I get a card or a pen and paper or even an email, for goodness sake, and write to someone and thank them for the impact their support and love has had in my life? When last did I commit an act of random kindness? Kevin and I were having breakfast in Santa Rosa recently, and when it came time to pay the bill, it had been mysteriously paid by someone. And I can't tell you the impact of that small act of kindness. It affected my whole day, and it inspired me to do more for others. When I share goodness, I start to become familiar with what it does in the world. I become more confident in it. And that is what leads to trusting in it. But to be honest, I still struggle with the desire to live from my goodness because I'm worried that it's going to ask me to do the right thing. When sometimes I don't want to. I struggle with the desire to live from my goodness because I'm worried that when I ask what would goodness do, it will direct me to turn away from selfishness when sometimes I don't want to. I'm worried that goodness will have me do something that is so unpopular with the masses or so out of step with culture, that I will be judged, or worse, threatened. And yet, even though following goodness isn't always comfortable, the result of listening to my inner goodness is satisfying on a soul-nourishing basis. And I've learned that every time I turn away from my goodness, the result is regret and a feeling of emptiness. When is the best time to notice goodness, pay attention to it, share it, and trust it? Whenever it is needed most, like every day. Whenever it seems to be absent, like every day. And through these practices, I've learned that in challenging times like today, it's not that goodness has disappeared. It's more likely that I've stopped noticing it. And I've let my consciousness become saturated with something else. Now, activating goodness inevitably leads to exploring our natural and ordinary kindness. That's the next step. And it's also the topic of next week's message. For now, I invite you to breathe in deeply, letting your eyes close as you exhale, as we join in a moment of inward affirmation. I'm going to read to you words adapted from Ernest Holmes. But I invite you to imagine that it is your own voice, reading in your own awareness, as if this message is originating in your own inner light of goodness. I have complete confidence that Spirit within me guides me and leads me into the pathway of peace. And so I free myself from every sense of condemnation, either against myself or against others. With these words, I am releasing every sense of animosity. I know that I'm not limited by anything that has happened or by anything that is happening now, because every moment I am entering into an entirely new set of experiences, because Spirit within me, which has no limits, is flowing through my thought and my feelings and my actions. I realize I am guided by the same intelligence which scatters the moonbeams across the waves and holds the forces of nature in place. I realize that I am aware of that Spirit within me and that it frees me from any belief in limitation. Right now, there is no doubt or uncertainty in my mind, for my mind is well made by a perfect Spirit. And so I let myself have a feeling of security. I have the feeling that I'm able to do anything that I ought to do. And so consciously I draw upon the direction of the goodness within me to live my life. As a result, peace is forever chanting its hymn of praise at the center of my being, and I lay aside all anxiety, all striving, and I let the law of love operate through me. Joyfully now, I anticipate a greater experience of unity, connection, and love than I ever have before. And a natural joy wells up within my mind and feelings, and life sings its song of ecstasy in my heart. I invite you to let the next breath you take be deeper than the one before, followed by a sigh.